Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to go through drawing shapes with the various functions that we have at our disposal from the Canvas widget. And it's pretty fun. And in order to do this, I built a sample application that will allow us to make tweaks to the canvas while the application is still running to prevent us from needing to repeatedly stop and rerun our application. In the resources for this course, you're going to find a Canvas examples.py program, and you're going to want to download this in order to follow along. But there are quite a few different functions that we have at our disposal using Canvas, and I wanted to make it as quick and painless for us to see these in action as possible. So I created a tool that will allow us to interact with these and code while the application is still running. Before we'll actually be able to run this program, we are going to need to pip install something. So let's do python m pip install pillow. And this is going to install a fork of the pill library, which is the Python image library, that's going to make it easier for us to work with images. You might already have this installed, you might not, but go ahead and run this command and that will get it installed with your active version of Python. If you're using some different Python executable, then make sure to use the right one there. But looking at this program, I do want to run through this because there's some interesting and semi-complicated stuff going on here. One, I did use something that we haven't talked about for doing scrolled text. I wanted to have a text area that could scroll based on the amount of text that I had, and the scrolled text module allows us to do that. This isn't something that we're explicitly going to cover throughout this course, but I'm giving you the tools to kind of show you how to go through tkinter and look at the different modules that you have and Google around. Thankfully, you've used plenty of GUI applications in your lifetime, so you know the sort of things that you might want to use in order to build something useful. So if you Google tkinter tree view by chance, you'll probably find that there's a widget we could use for that too. Continuing on, we're going to just create the window. I'm creating a sidebar and a main area. The main area is going to have a canvas in it, and then it's going to have the scrolled output that's going to render the text used to draw the actual canvas element that we're currently seeing when we click the button. We're also going to have another button at the top of the screen that says run code. And this is actually kind of neat because you can modify the contents of the code output. And when you click run code, it's going to compile that down into actual Python, delete the contents of the canvas, and then reevaluate the code so you can make modifications on the fly. It's going to render all of this stuff to the screen, but then the rest of this, we have a decorator that I created in order to clear out the contents of the canvas and get the source code and write the source code into code output. And we're going to use that on all of our example functions. And we don't need to look at all these, just know that I wrote a bunch of functions that I tied to buttons that will allow us to see our examples in action. We don't need to look at the code here because we'll be able to see it in the application as it's running. So let's go ahead and run Python canvas examples. And this will create a window for us here. And then if we want to draw a line, we can see that it renders out like this. And this is the exact code used to draw out this line. So canvases work in an interesting way. You'll take the one canvas that you have, and every time you say create line, that's going to add an element to it. And you can layer multiple things because you could say create line, create line, create line multiple times, and it would draw multiple lines. That won't work in the example that I have here because every time you run code or click one of the buttons, I'm deleting all of the contents of the canvas. But that is an important thing to note, is that you are adding things to the canvas, and you can store these off so that you can later delete very specific aspects from what you're doing here. So if you want to build an image editor using tkinter, that's how you would go about doing it. You would use create line or create polygon to do various things. But actually looking at what's going on here, we're going to be working with points on this line. So we have the point is 30, 30. That's going to be this first point. 300, 300 is going to be this point. And then 200, 100 is going to be this right here. And we can have an essentially infinite number of these. It's kind of variadic in the amount of points that we can put on this line. So we could draw all sorts of zigzags here. We set the width of the line using actual keyword parameters here. So this makes it a little bit thicker. We set the fill to black. Arrow, we can say TK last, TK first, or TK both. And that will put this little arrow right here. And then smooth is set to false. And smooth is an interesting one because this allows us to draw curves. And rather than modifying what we have here, we can just click on draw line smooth, which is the exact same code, except for I changed smooth to true. And you'll see that where we had this point down here and this is where we were ending, it's actually going to just draw it to where it smooths out that path there. And that's how you get this sort of curve going on here. All of the examples that I'm showing you are not exhaustive, and I've linked to some documentation in the resources for this lesson. But the other things we can do besides lines are going to be polygons. And polygons work in the same way that a line does essentially, except for it's going to auto close. In fact, this is almost exactly the same code as create line, except for we're calling create polygon, but it's the same points. So we have 30, 30, 300, 300, and 200, 100. The difference being we have outline red to draw this red outline, and it automatically closes the polygon when you're done. So since we have 3 points in the polygon, it's going to draw a triangle. But if we wanted to make this a really weird polygon, we could add a 4th point at 30, 170. And you'll notice that this is a very strange one, and that's because it puts these in order. So we're going from this point, down to this point, up to this point, and then back over to this point. And then it's going to close from here to there. And that causes it to look like it's 2 triangles here. But if we had put these in just a slightly different order, which is what I do in draw normal polygon, you'll see that we actually just created this 4-sided polygon because we changed the order. Rather than having 30, 170 be the last one, we had it be the second one. If you want to work with rectangles, circles, or ovals, you're going to have some different ones here. We have create rectangle, which makes it easy. This one only takes 2 points. It's going to take a top point, and then it's going to take a different point, and then it will figure out where the other points need to be in order to make it a rectangle. And if we were to change this to be something like 200, 300, and we come up here and run code, you'll see that it will redraw, and we can see what the difference here is. If we change this to blue, run it again, it's going to go ahead and change. So this is where the interactive portion of this comes into play. You can modify what is down here and go ahead and run it and see it immediately. So I hope that you'll take the opportunity to interact with this to really get a feel for what's going on. Moving on to circles, we have create oval, and this is going to be the only way that we go about doing this. If you give it 2 points that would actually make it able to create a circle, then it'll go ahead and do that. So for instance, this one's going to go from 30, 30 to 300, 300. But if we wanted this to be an oval, then we would just slightly change it. So going from 30, 30 to 200, 300 is going to create this oval here. Moving on to arcs, this is where things get a little bit different. Arc is a lot more complicated than the other functions we've worked with so far. We're going to use create arc. It's going to take multiple points, just 2 points in fact, but then style is going to be the thing that we're working with here. And if we say style arc, it's just going to draw a line from one to the other and kind of arc it there. And it's going to base that off of like if there were a 90-degree angle between them. And you can see that because if we turn this to PySlice, it'll actually close that off and we're able to outline it just by changing PySlice right here. And then we have another one called chord, which if we change that, it's going to draw this, still basing things kind of off of where the 90-degree is here, but then it's going to draw a line directly through them. And the two other things that you work with arc that you won't work with other ones are going to be, we have a extent, and you'll say something like 180. And this will change exactly what's going on. So we're using this point and this point, but instead of having 90 here, it's going to go a full 180. And it's going to take a little bit of variation to kind of figure out what's going on here, but this is kind of how it works. And then you can also say start, and you could set this to something like the 45, which would be probably right around here-ish, if I'm guessing right. And it's going to then draw the exact same thing, but it's going to shift it to where the starting point was at where the 45-degree angle would have been. So this gets a little bit complicated, and you're going to really want to mess with this to get a full understanding of what you're going on. But when it comes to drawing lines and shapes, these are what we have. We have create line, we have create polygon, create rectangle, create oval, and create arc. And with these, you can draw almost any shape that you want to. So if you wanted to do something like render out a line graph in some way, you could do that using some math and draw a line and just have it say that 0, 0 is going to be the starting point in your line graph, for instance, and then 10 points over, it was set to 300. And then 20 points over, there were only 40 or whatever, and then it would actually draw a line graph for you pretty easily. You would have to add some more elements to your page to draw kind of the sidebars for whatever on the graph that you're drawing, but it's something that you could totally do utilizing Canvas. It is worth noting that the origin for this works the same way that it does for the entire window. So this is 0, 0 right here. This is 30, 30. So even though this is positive in the X direction, positive in the Y direction is going to be having us going down. So you do have to think about it a little bit differently. Like for instance, if you wanted it to look like it was at 30, 0, you would actually have to have it be 3,300, say, if this is where you wanted your starting point to be. The other thing we're going to look at, besides just shapes here, is going to be text. And these get a little bit weird, but we do have create text because this is another type of thing that you might want to layer into a drawing that you're doing. And you have things like the point that you want it to be anchored on, the fill color, the text, and the font size. And you'll notice that this looks really weird, and that's because the default anchoring is going to be center. But if we set this to anchor northwest, it's going to go ahead and put the anchor right here at 2020, and it's going to render out just properly. There are some more options that you can utilize in order to change how kind of the wrapping goes around here. But when you do need to go ahead and draw text, this is one way that you could do it instead of creating something like a label and just like stacking that on top of your canvas element. You can actually just draw text directly onto it. But that covers most of this, and we're going to cover images in an entirely different lesson.